The first thing Elias noticed wasn't the silence, for the dead had been silent for months, save for their ceaseless, guttural moans. It was the ash. Not the flaky gray powder of a burnt-out fireplace, but a fine, gritty snow that blanketed everything in a uniform, deathly pallor. It fell from a sky the color of bruised plum, obscuring the morning sun into a faint, sickly glow. The second thing was the taste. A metallic, acrid tang that clung to his tongue, a ghost of ozone and something unidentifiable, chemical. It was hours before the persistent tremor in his hands, the dull ache behind his eyes, confirmed what the radio static had hinted at in its dying gasps. The world, already broken, had been shattered. The mod nuclear apocalypse. The words echoed in his mind like a death knell. Elias had woken in his makeshift safe house, a hastily barricaded two-story in Muldra, to the wail of distant sirens, then a sound that defied description, a world-shaking thump that vibrated through the very ground. Now, the sirens were gone, the distant moans muted by the thick air, and the tremor was a constant companion. His in-game health panel, usually a comforting green, was flashing a muted, sickly amber icon he had never seen before, a tiny biohazard symbol. Radiation exposure. His mind, still reeling, connected the dots with a sickening lurch. Shit, he whispered, the sound swallowed by the oppressive quiet. He fumbled through his precious medical supplies, pulling out a handful of white pills. Anti-rad, the description read. Limited supply. He swallowed one, chased it with lukewarm, boiled water from his rain collector. The tremor lessened almost imperceptibly, the biohazard icon dimming a fraction. It was a temporary reprieve, a band-aid on a gaping wound. The immediate objective shifted from survive the zombies to survive the zombies and the invisible poison, killing me from the inside out. His trusted baseball bat felt heavier, his movements sluggish. Stepping outside was a horrifying gamble. The air itself was a threat. He pulled the thickest gas mask he owned over his face, the filters already showing signs of heavy use, and cinched the hood of his hazmat suit tight. It wasn't full protection, not by a long shot, but it was better than nothing. Every journey out into the ash-choked landscape would be a race against a clock he couldn't see, a dosage he couldn't accurately measure. Muldra, once a desolate haven of scavenging, was now a death trap. The radiation levels, according to his newly acquired Geiger counter, a lucky find from a military surplus store, just days before the blast spiked dangerously high in the town center. The streets were choked with cars, some fused into molten slag, others eerily pristine, all dusted with the ubiquitous ash. And the zombies. They were still there. Shambling through the gray haze, their moans muffled, their skin leathery and desiccated, like mummified horrors. They, too, were likely irradiated, their very touch a potential vector for the slow, creeping death. Elias needed a new base. A real base. Not just zombie-free, but radiation-free, or as close as he could get. He needed sustainable food, water, and crucially, more anti-rad pills. His current supply wouldn't last the month. His eyes fell on a tattered map of Knox County, spread across his crafting table. He traced a finger along the winding river, away from the dense urban zones, towards the isolated cabins and farmhouses in the wilderness. Riverside. Perhaps the farming community, or one of the remote fishing cabins along the water's edge. The river itself, he knew, would be contaminated, but perhaps the land further inland offered a safer zone. His current food supply was dwindling, a few cans of peaches, some stale crackers, a half-eaten bag of chips. Foraging was out of the question, any plant life would be contaminated. Hunting would be equally risky, the animals themselves likely poisoned. He needed an indoor farm. A well, or a reliable, clean water source. The journey was a nightmare. The sky, a perpetual twilight, bled a sickly orange at what used to be dawn and dusk. He drove his patched-up step van, its engine groaning, the tires slipping on the layer of ash. Every few hours, he'd pull over, check his Geiger counter, and if the numbers were too high, swallow another precious anti-rad pill. His health panel would flicker, the icon dimming for a time, only to eventually brighten again. Zombies, once a familiar enemy, were now a constant backdrop of dread. He couldn't afford a prolonged fight, the exertion would raise his body temperature, making the radiation effects worse, and his hazmat suit offered little protection from their claws and bites. He learned to weave through their shambling lines, praying his worn tires wouldn't pop. 3 days later, exhausted and paranoid, he found it. A small, two-story hunting lodge, nestled deep in the woods west of Riverside, overlooking a small, mostly dry creek bed. The GPS signal had mostly died, but his old paper map had led him here. It was far enough from the river that the Geiger counter read a relatively stable, low-level radiation, a constant background hum, but manageable. The ground was lightly dusted with ash, but not choked. The first order of business was clearing the lodge. He found a handful of shamblers inside, their movements slow, almost lethargic, as if even they struggled with the new world. He dispatched them with practiced swings of his axe, conserving his bat. Each swing was a calculated risk, each grunt of exertion, a drain on his dwindling stamina. He hated the thought of these things decaying inside his new sanctuary, but dragging them out would expose him to more radiation than he could spare. They'd simply be another part of the decor for now. The lodge was surprisingly intact. Sturdy log walls, a stone fireplace, and most importantly, a large, relatively flat area on the second floor, with windows facing east and south, perfect for an indoor farm. There was even a dusty old well outside, its water potentially salvageable. The next few weeks were a brutal cycle of work and worry. Phase 1, Security and Water. Elias barricaded every window and door with planks scavenged from nearby abandoned shacks. He reinforced the frame, setting up multiple layers of defense. The ground floor became a maze of crate walls and choke points, funneling any potential intruders towards his fortified upper floor. The well water was his primary concern. He installed a hand pump and a complex filtering system, using charcoal from burnt logs and layers of cloth. He boiled every drop, religiously, monitoring himself for any signs of sickness. His anti-rad pills were down to a single strip. Phase 2, Scavenging and Radiation Management. He made desperate, high-speed runs into the outskirts of Riverside, his Geiger counter chirping a frantic melody. He targeted pharmacies, hospitals, and military checkpoints anywhere he thought anti-rad pills might be. He moved like a ghost, snatching what he could, never engaging, always watching his radiation levels. He also searched for seeds, any seeds, for his farm. One run nearly cost him everything. He had spotted a pharmacy intact, only to find a small horde inside, attracted by a previous, careless survivor. The Geiger counter was screaming, the biohazard icon on his panel throbbing. He had snagged 2 full boxes of anti-rad pills, a massive haul, but not before a zombie had clipped his hazmat suit, tearing a small hole. He felt the phantom chill of the invisible poison, the instant spike in his counter. He had barely made it back to the lodge, fighting off a wave of nausea, his strength rapidly depleting. He had torn off the suit, taken 2 pills immediately, and scrubbed himself raw, praying. For a week, he had felt constantly unwell, but the pills had held the worst at bay. He was living on borrowed time, the cumulative exposure adding up. Phase 3, Food Production. The indoor farm was his salvation. He tarped the second floor, sealing it from the elements, and brought in sacks of soil he had meticulously dug from the least irradiated patch of forest he could find. He planted the scavenged seeds, corn, potatoes, beans, and tended them with frantic devotion. His only light source was a clunky, fuel-guzzling generator, run sparingly, or sunlight filtering through the ash-stained windows. Water came from his purified well supply. The first sprouts were a miracle. Green shoots pushing through the dark soil, a defiant burst of life in a world obsessed with death. It would be weeks, months, before he had a stable harvest, but it was a start. He rationed his canned goods with meticulous care, each meal a sparse ritual. Phase 4, Establishing a Routine and Fighting Despair. Days blended into weeks. Heat up water, clean filters, check traps, tend the farm, repair barricades, consume a meager meal, take an anti-rad pill, if the symptoms began to surface. The air outside was still thick with ash, the sky a perpetual twilight, but inside the lodge, a semblance of routine emerged. He had set up a small fishing line in the mostly stagnant creek bed, hoping for some protein. The first fish he caught, a skinny, discolored thing, he refused to eat, burying it with a pang of guilt. The next few, after careful inspection and more boiling, he risked. Survival was a spectrum of unacceptable choices. His sanity was a fragile thing. The isolation was absolute. He talked to himself, mumbled instructions to inanimate objects, and sometimes, in the dead of the ash-filled night, he would wake up screaming, the phantom chill of the radiation a constant companion, even in his dreams. He had found a few books, old adventure novels, DIY guides, and they became his last bastion against the crushing silence. The lodge eventually became a fortress. The ground floor was a network of tripwires and spike traps. The upstairs, his sanctuary, was warm, dry, and protected. His crops were growing, slowly, but surely. He had enough anti-rad pills to last him for months now, enough fuel for the generator to last a year for only growing the plants, and a stash of canned food that would sustain him until the first harvest. He still saw them, sometimes. Shambling figures in the ash-choked woods, drawn by faint sounds, by the memory of life. He had watched them through his reinforced windows, their moans a distant, mournful song. He never engaged unless absolutely necessary. The lodge was zombie-free, yes, but the world outside was still crawling with them. One evening, as the perpetual twilight deepened into nuclear night, Elias sat by his crackling fire, the only light in the oppressive darkness. He ate a small bowl of cooked rice, carefully measured. He was thinner, his eyes haunted, but he was alive. The biohazard icon on his health panel was calm now, a faint, almost invisible presence. He had achieved it. A survivable, food-secure, zombie-free base. But the victory felt hollow. He was safe, for now. But what was he surviving for? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered, just like the ash outside. He glanced at his map, tracing a finger across the desolate, irradiated landscape. There were other places, other survivors perhaps. But the thought of venturing out again, of facing the invisible poison and the endless dead, was exhausting. For now, he would tend his plants, reinforce his walls, boil his water, and take his pills. He would survive. Because that's what a survivor did. And perhaps, one day, the ash would settle for good, the sky would clear, and the world would remember what it felt like to be truly alive. Until then, Elias Thorne would wait, and endure, in his silent, irradiated haven. The game continued, but the rules had changed forever.